I am a retired teacher. I know my rights.
Stop resisting. Put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest.
Police brutality! You're hurting me!
The emergency call came in at 6:47 p.m. on a humid Saturday evening. A frantic woman's voice crackled through the dispatcher's headset, reporting an assault with a deadly weapon in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. The weapon in question? A taser. The suspect? Her own next-door neighbor, a 62-year-old retired schoolteacher named Margaret Thornton. When Officer Jackson pulled up to the scene, he expected the usual neighbor dispute, maybe some shouting over a property line or a barking dog. What he found instead was a woman standing in her driveway, arms crossed, taser still clipped to her belt, waiting like she just called customer service about a defective product. This wasn't going to be a warning. This was going to be an arrest. And Margaret had absolutely no idea she was about to become the villain in her own story. The victim, a 34-year-old mother named Shanice Williams, stood on her own front lawn with her two children, ages 7 and 9, huddled behind her legs. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she pointed toward the fence separating the properties. She told Officer Jackson that Margaret had walked directly up to the chain-link barrier, aimed a bright yellow taser at her chest, and threatened to use it if the kids didn't stop playing basketball. It was 6:30 p.m. on a weekend. The kids were shooting hoops. And Margaret decided the appropriate response was 50,000 volts. If you love watching entitled suspects realize they're not above the law, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to get wild. Officer Jackson's body camera captured every moment as he approached Shanice. She was calm, almost eerily composed for someone who'd just been threatened with a weapon. That composure would become crucial. She explained that this wasn't the first incident. For the past 6 months, ever since her family moved in, Margaret had complained about everything. The children's laughter. The smell of their grilled food. The music playing at 4 p.m. on a Sunday. Shanice had tried to be neighborly. She'd apologized for noise, turned down music, even baked cookies as a peace offering. Margaret returned the cookies with a note that said they looked undercooked. But today was different. Today, Margaret didn't just complain. She armed herself. Shanice recounted how her son had missed a shot, and the basketball bounced near the fence. As her daughter ran to retrieve it, Margaret appeared from her backyard like she'd been waiting. She didn't yell a warning. She pulled out the taser, pointed it directly at Shanice's torso, and said, "Next time that ball comes over here, this goes into you." The children saw everything. They heard everything. And now they were terrified of their own backyard. Officer Jackson asked Shanice if she had any video evidence. She pulled out her phone with the speed of someone who'd been preparing for this exact moment. The footage was shaky but clear. Margaret standing at the fence line, yellow taser in hand, arm extended in a firing position. You could hear her voice on the recording, cold and flat. "I'm warning you. I will defend my property." Shanice's voice responded, calm but firm. "We're on our property. The kids are just playing." Margaret's response was chilling. "I don't care. This neighborhood was peaceful before you people moved in. You people." Officer Jackson's jaw tightened. That phrase carried weight. It wasn't just about noise. It wasn't about a basketball. This was about who Margaret thought belonged in her neighborhood and who didn't. The video ended with Margaret turning and walking back toward her house, taser still in hand, like she'd just won an argument. She had no idea she'd just created a permanent record of a felony. With the video evidence secured, Officer Jackson made his way to Margaret's front door. His partner, Officer Ramirez, stayed with the family to take additional statements. Jackson knocked 3 times. The door opened almost immediately. Margaret stood there in a floral blouse and khaki pants, reading glasses perched on her nose, looking like someone's kindly grandmother. Except grandmothers don't typically greet police officers with a taser visible on their hip. She smiled. Actually smiled. "Oh good, you're here. I was about to call you myself." Officer Jackson blinked. This was already going off script. Most people who've just committed a crime try to look innocent. Margaret looked relieved. She invited him in like he was there to fix her cable. Jackson declined and asked her to step outside. She obliged, still smiling, still utterly oblivious. He asked her directly, "Ma'am, did you have an interaction with your neighbor today?" Margaret's face lit up. "Yes. Finally, someone's going to do something about them." Officer Jackson maintained his professional demeanor, but his body camera caught the slight shift in his stance. He already knew where this was going. He asked Margaret to describe what happened. She launched into a monologue like she'd been rehearsing it. She talked about property values. About how the neighborhood used to be quiet. About how she'd lived there for 30 years and never had problems until they'd moved in. She complained about the basketball hoop, the noise, the cars parked on the street. She said she tried to be patient, but today was the final straw. The ball came near her fence, and she'd had enough. Then came the moment that sealed her fate. Officer Jackson asked, "Did you display a weapon?" Margaret didn't hesitate. "Yes, I showed them my taser. I wanted them to know I'm serious." She said it with the confidence of someone who believed she'd done the right thing. Jackson asked, "Did you point it at anyone?" Margaret nodded. "I pointed it at the mother. I told her if she didn't control her kids, I'd use it." Silence. Officer Jackson let that statement hang in the air. She just confessed to aggravated assault. On camera. With zero awareness of what she'd done. Officer Jackson's training kicked in. He needed to clarify intent. He asked, "Ma'am, do you understand that pointing a taser at someone is considered a threat of deadly force?" Margaret's smile faltered. "Deadly force? It's a taser. It's non-lethal." Jackson shook his head. In the eyes of the law, any weapon capable of causing serious bodily harm, including a taser, can be classified as a dangerous weapon when used to threaten someone. Margaret's expression shifted. Confusion. Then indignation. But they were the ones causing problems. "I have a right to defend my property." Jackson remained calm. "Ma'am, defense of property doesn't extend to threatening your neighbors with a weapon when they're on their own property and not posing a physical threat to you." Margaret's face flushed red. "So you're saying I'm supposed to just let them do whatever they want? Let them ruin my peace and quiet?" Jackson replied, "I'm saying the appropriate response is to call us. Not to arm yourself and threaten a mother and her children." That's when Margaret's tone changed. The polite facade cracked. "Of course you take their side." Officer Ramirez joined them, having finished with the Williams family. He'd reviewed the video evidence and confirmed the children's statements matched their mother's account. Both officers now stood on Margaret's driveway. The dynamic had shifted. This was no longer a friendly conversation. Jackson explained that based on her own admission and the video evidence, she was going to be placed under arrest for aggravated assault. Margaret's eyes went wide. "Arrest? You can't be serious." Jackson was very serious. He asked her to turn around and place her hands behind her back. Margaret took a step backward. "No. Absolutely not. I'm the victim here." Ramirez positioned himself to her left, cutting off any retreat path. Jackson repeated his command, his voice firmer now. "Ma'am, you've admitted to pointing a taser at your neighbor. That's a crime. You need to comply." Margaret's voice rose to a shout. "I am a retired teacher. I have never broken the law in my life. You people are making a huge mistake. You people." There it was again. The mask was fully off now. Margaret tried to walk back toward her house. Officer Ramirez gently but firmly placed a hand on her shoulder to stop her. She spun around, eyes blazing. "Don't you touch me. I know my rights." Jackson stepped closer. "Ma'am, you do have rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. But you do not have the right to resist arrest." Margaret's breathing quickened. She was spiraling. She looked past the officers toward the Williams family, who were still standing on their lawn watching. Margaret pointed an accusing finger. "This is all your fault. You don't belong here. You've ruined everything." Shanice Williams stood perfectly still, arms around her children, saying nothing. She didn't need to. Margaret was destroying herself. Officer Jackson made the decision. He reached for Margaret's wrist to guide her hands behind her back. She jerked away violently. "Get your hands off me." Ramirez moved in to assist. Within seconds, they had her wrists secured in handcuffs, but not before she'd kicked backward, catching Jackson in the shin. Resisting arrest added another charge to the growing list. Margaret was now screaming at the top of her lungs. "Police brutality. I'm being assaulted. Someone help me." Neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Officer Jackson, maintaining his composure despite the throbbing pain in his leg, began reading Margaret her Miranda rights. She talked over him the entire time. "I don't need to hear this. I watch TV. I know my rights better than you do." Jackson finished the advisement anyway. He asked if she understood her rights. Margaret spat back, "I understand that this is a disgrace. I understand that you're protecting criminals while arresting innocent people." Ramirez radioed for backup and requested a supervisor to the scene. This was escalating beyond a standard arrest. Margaret continued her tirade as they walked her toward the patrol car. She hurled insults at the officers, at the Williams family, at the entire neighborhood. Every word was being recorded. Every slur, every threat, every moment of her complete meltdown, preserved forever on body camera footage. As they reached the patrol car, Margaret went limp, a classic passive resistance technique. She let her legs give out, forcing the officers to hold her weight. Jackson and Ramirez had seen this before. They calmly lowered her to a seated position on the curb and called for additional units. Margaret sat there, handcuffed, red-faced, and panting. She looked up at the growing crowd of neighbors and yelled, "Are you all just going to stand there? They're arresting me for protecting my property. This could be you next." The neighbors exchanged glances. No one moved to help her. One elderly man shook his head and walked back inside. A woman with a stroller turned away. Margaret was learning a hard lesson in real time. She'd assumed the neighborhood shared her views. She'd assumed they'd see her as the victim. She was wrong. The backup units arrived, and with 4 officers now on scene, they lifted Margaret to her feet and guided her into the back of the patrol car. She banged her head against the window repeatedly, not hard enough to injure herself, but loud enough to draw attention. She was performing for an audience that had already turned away. Inside the patrol car, Margaret's rant continued. Officer Jackson's in-car camera captured every word. She cycled through denial, anger, bargaining, and back to anger in rapid succession. "You're making a mistake. I'm going to sue. I know the mayor. This is discrimination. You're only doing this because of who they are." Jackson, now seated in the driver's seat, glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, we're doing this because you committed a crime." Margaret scoffed. "A crime? I defended my property. That's not a crime, that's the Second Amendment." Ramirez, in the passenger seat, couldn't help himself. The Second Amendment protects your right to bear arms. It doesn't give you the right to threaten people with them. Margaret fell silent for a moment, processing. Then she tried a new tactic. Her voice softened, became almost pleading. "Officers, please. I'm 62 years old. I have a clean record. I've lived in this neighborhood my entire adult life. Can't we just forget this happened? I'll apologize to them if that's what you want." Jackson's response was measured. "Ma'am, you threatened a woman and her children with a weapon. That's not something we can just forget." The drive to the station was long enough for Margaret to cycle through her entire emotional playbook. She cried. She bargained. She threatened legal action. She claimed medical issues. She demanded to speak to a supervisor. Jackson and Ramirez had heard it all before. They remained professional, answering her questions when appropriate and ignoring her outbursts when necessary. At one point, Margaret asked, "What if I said I didn't mean it? What if I said the taser wasn't even charged?" Ramirez turned slightly in his seat. "Ma'am, whether the taser was charged or not doesn't matter. The threat itself is the crime. You created fear of imminent harm." Margaret slumped back against the seat. For the first time, a flicker of realization crossed her face. She was actually going to be processed. Booked. Fingerprinted. Photographed. This wasn't going away. Her voice dropped to a whisper. This is going to be on my record forever, isn't it? Jackson met her eyes in the mirror. Yes, ma'am. It is. At the station, the booking process began. Margaret was removed from the patrol car and escorted inside. The booking officer, a veteran named Sergeant Mills, had already been briefed. He greeted Margaret with professional detachment. Ma'am, I need you to empty your pockets and remove any jewelry. Margaret complied mechanically, her earlier fire extinguished. She placed her keys, wallet, and wedding ring into a plastic tray. The taser had already been seized as evidence. Mills asked routine questions. Name. Date of birth. Address. Emergency contact. Margaret answered in a monotone. When he asked about the emergency contact, she hesitated. My son. But please don't call him. He'll be so disappointed. Mills made a note but explained that she had the right to a phone call. Margaret declined. She couldn't face it. The fingerprinting came next. Mills pressed her fingers onto the digital scanner one by one. Margaret stared at the screen, watching her prints appear in stark black and white. She looked like she was watching her identity dissolve in real time. The mugshot was the breaking point. Margaret stood against the height chart, holding the placard with her booking number. The camera flashed. She flinched. That photograph would be public record. It would be searchable online. Her grandchildren might see it one day. Her former students. Her church group. The reality of the internet age crashed down on her all at once. After the photo, she was led to a holding cell. The small room contained a metal bench and a toilet. Nothing else. She sat down heavily, still handcuffed, and stared at the cinder block wall. For the first time in hours, she was alone with her thoughts. And those thoughts were brutal. She replayed the day in her mind. The basketball bouncing. The children laughing. Her anger boiling over. The decision to grab the taser. The look on Shanice's face when she pointed it. The officer's questions. Her own words, captured on camera, sealing her fate. She'd thought she was defending her territory. She'd thought she was in the right. She'd thought the police would take her side. She'd been wrong about everything. Hours later, a public defender arrived. His name was Marcus Chen, a young attorney with kind eyes and a worn briefcase. He sat across from Margaret in a small interview room and reviewed the incident report. His expression grew more concerned with each page. He looked up at her. Mrs. Thornton, I'm going to be direct with you. This is serious. You're being charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, menacing, and resisting arrest. Margaret's voice was hoarse. The taser is non-lethal. Chen nodded. Technically yes, but under state law, any weapon capable of causing serious bodily injury can be classified as deadly in the context of assault. Tasers have killed people. Elderly people. People with heart conditions. Children. Margaret's face went pale. There were children. Chen continued. The prosecution has video evidence of you pointing the taser and making explicit threats. They have your confession to the police on body camera. And they have witness testimony from the mother and both children. Margaret whispered, what's going to happen to me? Chen leaned back. Best case scenario. Plea deal. Probation. Anger management. Mandatory counseling. Restitution. Worst case. This goes to trial, and you're convicted. You could face up to 5 years in prison. Margaret's arraignment was set for Monday morning. She spent the weekend in county jail, a shock to the system for someone who'd never even had a speeding ticket. Her cellmate was a 19-year-old girl arrested for shoplifting. The girl asked what Margaret was in for. Margaret couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. She just shook her head. On Monday, she stood before Judge Patricia Moreno, a no-nonsense jurist known for her disdain of bullies. The prosecutor outlined the charges. Chen entered a plea of not guilty, standard procedure. The judge reviewed the case file, her expression hardening as she read. She looked at Margaret over her glasses. Mrs. Thornton, you threatened a mother and her minor children with a weapon because of a basketball. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but Chen put a hand on her arm, silencing her. Judge Moreno continued. I'm setting bail at $15,000. You are prohibited from any contact, direct or indirect, with the victims. You are to surrender any and all weapons in your possession. You will wear a GPS monitor. Violation of any of these conditions will result in immediate remand to custody. Do you understand? Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. Margaret's son, David, posted her bail. The drive home was silent. When they pulled into her driveway, she saw it. A for sale sign on the Williams lawn. They were moving. Because of her. David helped her inside and sat her down at the kitchen table. He didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He just looked at her with profound sadness. Mom, what were you thinking? Margaret couldn't answer. She didn't know. She'd convinced herself she was protecting something, but now she couldn't even articulate what that something was. Her peace and quiet. Her property value. Or was it something uglier, something she didn't want to admit even to herself? David left after making sure she had groceries and her GPS monitor was functioning. Alone in her house, Margaret walked to the back window and looked at the fence. The basketball hoop was still there, but silent. No children's laughter. No bouncing ball. Just silence. The silence she'd wanted so badly. And it felt like death. The case moved slowly through the system. Margaret's attorney negotiated with the prosecutor. The Williams family's victim impact statements were devastating. Shanice described how her children now flinched at loud noises. How her daughter had nightmares about the yellow taser. How they'd lost their sense of safety in their own home. The prosecution offered a deal. Plead guilty to misdemeanor assault and reckless endangerment. 2 years probation. 200 hours of community service. Mandatory anger management and implicit bias training. A permanent restraining order. And a public apology. Margaret wanted to fight it. She wanted to go to trial, to explain herself, to make people understand. Chen talked her down. Mrs. Thornton, if you go to trial, you will lose. The jury will see that video. They'll hear your words. And they'll see a woman who threatened children. You will go to prison. Take the deal. She took the deal. The public apology was held at a community mediation session. Margaret sat across from Shanice and her children. A mediator facilitated. Margaret read from a prepared statement, her voice shaking. I am deeply sorry for my actions. I threatened you and your family. I made you feel unsafe in your own home. There is no excuse for what I did. My behavior was wrong, and I take full responsibility. Shanice listened, her face unreadable. When Margaret finished, Shanice spoke. Her words were measured but powerful. You didn't just threaten me. You traumatized my children. You made them afraid of their own backyard. You looked at us and saw something less than human. And that's something I can't forgive easily. But I accept your apology because I need to move forward. The children said nothing. They just stared at Margaret with wide, wary eyes. Margaret would carry that image for the rest of her life. The community service hours were served at a homeless shelter. The irony wasn't lost on Margaret. She spent her weekends serving meals to people she'd once crossed the street to avoid. The bias training forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. The anger management taught her that rage was a choice, not a reflex. 1 year later, Margaret's probation officer filed a report. She'd completed all her requirements. She'd attended every session. She'd paid her restitution. She'd followed every rule. But the damage was done. Her reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed. Former friends avoided her. Her church quietly asked her to step down from the women's ministry. Her grandchildren asked fewer questions when they visited, their parents having explained in vague terms that grandma made a mistake. The Williams family did move. They found a neighborhood where their children could play without fear. Margaret saw the moving truck pull away and felt a wave of shame so intense she had to sit down. She'd driven them out. She'd won her quiet neighborhood back. And it cost her everything. The question that haunts this case is simple but profound. How does a retired schoolteacher, a woman who spent her career shaping young minds, become so consumed by fear and prejudice that she points a weapon at children? Margaret Thornton believed she was defending her property. But what she was really defending was a worldview where certain people belonged and others didn't. Where noise from her kind of neighbor was community, but noise from a different kind was an invasion. The law doesn't recognize those distinctions. The law saw a woman with a weapon threatening a family. And the law responded accordingly. Was Margaret Thornton a monster, or was she simply a product of biases she never examined until it was too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comment. Do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.